I think sometimes we feel like we have to over rotate on the difference and we want to walk through that door. I would say instead, gather people who share a lived experience and walk through the door of their humanity, right? What's really working for you here at work? What's not working for you? What do you wish were true? What are you concerned about? You can ask those questions generally as long as you're grouping people in a way that's going to teach you something about how they're unique.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. Welcome back, Rebel HR listeners. Extremely excited for our guest this week. We have been waiting for so long to talk with her. I think we booked her like almost 6 months ago, it seems like. So really excited to talk to Tara Jaye Frank. She is an author, advisor, teacher, and Waymaker. She's an equity strategist who has advised and educated thousands of Fortune 500 executives across multiple industries and large member organizations. Her work, fueled by a deep belief in the creative power and potential of everyone, focuses on building bridges between people, ideas, and opportunity. She has recently written a book called The Waymakers, Clearing the Path to Workplace Equity with Competence and Confidence. Tara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kyle, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, like I said in the beginning, super excited for the conversation. I feel like I've been anxiously awaiting this for so long. And I just, as I was preparing for this and researching some of your background, I just appreciate so much of the work that you've done in the equity and the leadership and employee experience space. And so I want to start off by just asking a question. What inspired you to write your book, The Waymakers?
Yes, well, thank you for all of that, all those good vibes, and for the quintessential question, right? I get this question a lot, as you can imagine. There are a couple things that inspired me to write it. In the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time with CEOs and their C-suite teams, and I noticed that many of them had three things in common, right? When it comes to talking about diversity and equity and inclusion. The first thing is that most of them wanted to do the right thing. The second is many of them didn't necessarily know what the right thing was. And the third is some really felt unsure about how to step into the work. Where to begin, what to focus on, what to do and not do. And so I wrote the book as a field guide, if you will, right, for those high-level leaders and aspiring leaders to better understand the nature of the work, what's been in our way, what they can do practically, right, to remove the barriers to opportunity for everyone in their charge. So that's one side of why I wrote the book. The other, and why it's called The Waymakers, is, to be honest with you, every, Black and brown person or anyone who exists on a dimension of difference in a company who has risen to high levels of contribution got there not just because they're smart and experienced, right, and have great ideas, but because someone made a way for them. Someone opened a door and removed a barrier and ushered them through to greater levels of contribution. And we need more Waymakers. So I wrote the book both as inspiration, but also as a tool so that leaders could be more equipped, right, to lead in new ways.
Absolutely. I think it's really powerful. And I think about that, personally, I have so many people to thank for where I am. I had so many opportunities are because someone believed in me, whether that was a teacher or a mentor or a leader at work. But I would not be here without all of that support. And what strikes me as you walk through that is there are people that don't have that.
That's
or
right.
There are people that have a barrier in place. So as we think about that in the context of the world of work, how should we be thinking about identifying some of those barriers for folks, and how should we be thinking about forging that path for others in our organizations?
Yeah, it's a very broad question, of course, because there are so many, and especially those of us who work in human resources, work with people, with culture. My first place to start always is to gather great intelligence, right? You can imagine a lot of high level leaders ask me what they should do, and some of them want to start with best practices, right? We want to be a more equitable organization. We want to be a more inclusive organization. What are the best practices? What are other companies doing? And I always say, that's really not the best place to start, because someone else may be doing something that you've already done, or someone else may be doing something that you were not quite ready for. So the first step always is to gather good intelligence. Do you have a strong sense of what your employee experience currently is across all these dimensions of difference? And for me, that's different than an engagement survey. That's not necessarily asking them what they think about what you think about you. It's really trying to dig into what is happening day to day. How are your choices and behaviors impacting their relationship with you, right? As an organization, as a manager, how is it impacting their ability to be successful, to get to the next level? To feel, valued, to be psychologically safe. Like, these are all the kinds of questions and conversations that make us smarter about what to go do next. So understanding where those kinks in the system are is a really important first step. The second big thing we need to do, quite frankly, and I'm sure you will appreciate this, is take accountability, right, for shifting those cultures, for figuring out how to evolve the norms, right, that we've always just abided by. The thing about norms is we don't think about them anymore. We stop interrogating them because it's just the way we've always done things. But when we do things the way we've always done them, we continue to advantage the same people and we disadvantage the same people as well. So taking that responsibility, it's not just HR's job. Clearly, HR has a critical role in evolving culture, in creating better workplaces for employees. But we got to do that in partnership with business leaders. They have to own that and be leaders, right, in this space as much as they are in any other space. And the last thing I would say is we've got to develop more relationships across differences. Part of why people are not experiencing waymaking, right, the way that you did, the way you described, is because we're so isolated from one another. We tend to surround ourselves with and trust people who remind us of ourselves. And that leaves so many people on the outside looking in.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Absolutely. I think wonderful things to call out. You're absolutely right. Anything where you like destruct a norm, I love. We did name the podcast Rebel HR.
That's right.
But I think it's really powerful to, I want to circle back to what you talked about, and you probably saw. The listeners can't see the look on my face, but when you talked about like the difference between an employee opinion survey and actually understanding, your employee experience across the dimensions of difference, those are two very, very different things. So as we think about all of those dimensions of difference, I think I'm actually kind of going back to one of the reasons you wrote this book is so many of us are afraid about how to step into that, how to step into gathering that intel
Yep.
in a way that's not uncomfortable. What I guess thoughts or what observations have you seen as you were preparing for this book for organizations that did that the right way and kind of stepped into that in a way that worked?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I will tell you philosophically, one of the ways I approach my work is that everyone at work generally needs the same things, but some of us get those needs met to a lesser degree. So, in preparation for the Waymakers, we did a proprietary research study in partnership with a company called Brand Trust. And we ran a narrative inquiry study. We asked hundreds of employees to tell us stories of times they felt seen and respected and valued and protected, and to tell us stories of times they felt invisible and disrespected and underappreciated and scrutinized. And the learnings from that were so profound because some things we kind of all have in common, right? But the manifestation of those emotional states differs across groups. The way I think about it is if we approach every single person in our charge with the same level of curiosity and interest and listen for the similarities and the nuances, we will begin to identify patterns, right, of what certain groups have in common versus others. So simply, we can do an experience survey that's anonymous, right, but that asks people to identify themselves along different dimensions so that when we look at that data, we have an opportunity to splice it to see what's common and see what's different. That's going to teach us a little something about how people are experiencing our company uniquely. The other thing we can do is just gather people together, maybe in identity groups through ERGs, let's say. So we want to invite people, a small subsection of our Black ERG, a small subsection of our LGBT ERG, et cetera. And we just want to have conversations, not about, their Blackness per se, not about their sexual orientation, but about their experience, knowing that all of them are coming to that conversation with similar lived experiences. And that's the difference. I think sometimes we feel like we have to over rotate on the difference and we want to walk through that door. I would say instead, gather people who share a lived experience and walk through the door of their humanity, right? What's really working for you here at work? What's not working for you? What do you wish were true? What are you concerned about? You can ask those questions generally as long as you're grouping people in a way that's going to teach you something about how they're unique.
I love that phrase, walk through the door of their humanity. That's
Yeah.
you should trademark that. That's really good, Tara.
I'm sure somebody else said it in some kind of way at some point.
you subconsciously soaked it in. But
Yeah.
I think that's a really powerful. And for those that aren't familiar, ERG is Employee Resource Group, which
Yes, thank you.
I can and I will attest, and we've done some of this at my company where we've got a couple recently formed ERGs, and the points of connection that have come out of that. And for me, I'm a white guy in the Midwest in the United States. So, I'm not really traditionally diverse, but I get so much perspective just from being a fly on the wall in those meetings or reading the meeting notes or being kind of the executive sponsor for these groups. That then trickles through every aspect of every system that I have to touch in my role.
Right.
So I agree 100%. I think that, that was absolutely a wonderful call out. I'm one of the things I'm curious to ask about, and I just talked about this with a recent podcast guest is asking people to identify which groups they identify with. I think a lot of us in human resources are a little bit nervous about that, and it's we want the data, but we also don't want to categorize people into a narrow box, and we don't want to ask people to do something that's makes them feel, singled out or uncomfortable. So any recommendations for how to go through that kind of that identification process in a way that's actually comfortable for somebody, or is there no way to do it in a way that's comfortable? I'm
Are you
curious on your
talking about
perspective.
through a survey situation or just like in conversation? Because those are very different.
Um, yeah, yes, I guess, the way I think about it, I'm always thinking about system, like how do I
Yes,
systemically do this?
yes, yes, yes.
But yeah, so I guess I
So,
would lean more towards the system. What's the system
yeah,
for
so
that?
I'll tell you how I think about it because, first of all, let's acknowledge there's no right or wrong way to group people and then identify groups. At the end of the day, the best way to identify a person is to ask a person, right, how they identify or how they like to be addressed, and then respect that individual's preference. But because we're trying to do things that have system impact, that doesn't work in HR, right? Like you do need to group people along certain lines of distinction, or you're not going to learn anything about how the system works for some and not others. And so the way that I think about it, if we just take survey as an example, because it's the easiest way to talk about this, I will often do a disclaimer up front, or I'll recommend my clients do a disclaimer up front and says, we know identity is a very personal thing. Please answer the following questions to the degree that you are comfortable. So first of all, you've set the stage that some people are not going to want to answer these questions and you're respecting whatever boundary they may have. But then with each question, we'll say, please mark one or more that apply to you, list a bunch of races and ethnicities for an example, and then always have a prefer not to say. This way, you may not get all the data you want, but at least you're showing people the individual respect, right? Recognizing they may have boundaries and may not want to respond. In most cases, people will respond. But you got to give them that option. Otherwise, they feel put upon.
Yeah, I won't repeat this story because I told it on a recent episode, but yeah, I certainly stepped into that, made that mistake. So I can attest. Listen to Tara. Do it that way.
A lot of people do, though, and I think the most important thing when we're analyzing the data, and I'm sure that you and other guests have talked about this, or that you've talked about this in your day-to-day work, is we need to be looking at intersectional data. We sometimes only look at, race in a vacuum or gender in a vacuum, et cetera. But those intersections really matter and they create yet more unique experiences for people, right? If I'm gay and Black, I have a very unique experience from someone who is gay and not Black. If I am female and, Asian, I have a very different experience than the men who are Asian. And so that intersectionality matters. So the more data, the more demographic data we can try to collect, I think the better our decision making will be on the other side, because we'll just be that much more insightful.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, I wanted to take a quick break to tell you about the Employee Onboarding Podcast by Process Street. If you care about crafting a magical experience for new employees and you love podcasts, you won't want to miss this. Join the Process Street team as they have conversations with people leaders and technology creators exploring the world's most magical onboarding experiences. You will learn cutting-edge best practices, industry secrets, and technology to wow every new employee that walks through your door. I recommend the episode where Process Street's CEO, Vinay Patankar, sat down with Zapier CEO, Wade Foster, to talk about how they've scaled employee onboarding in a $5 billion remote-first organization. And the conversation with Ben Eubanks discussing how to leverage AI and automation to improve the new employee experience will blow your mind. You can find the Employee Onboarding Podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Go ahead and check it out. And don't forget, if you're interested in supercharging your employee onboarding or other HR processes, go ahead and give Process Street a try. You can sign up for a free account at www.process.st or check out their YouTube channel for a bunch of webinars and demos. I think it's really powerful to understand that and understand, the makeup of your organization. So let's fast forward. Let's say, okay, we've kind of we've understood the data. We understand the lived experience of our employees
Yep.
and in the context of their differences. And there are challenges there, or there are issues that arrive.
Yep.
Is that where the Waymakers need to come in?
Yes. So the Waymakers actually belong in every phase of this journey. The Waymakers are in the room when the survey is being designed, saying we're not asking hard enough questions, or we're throwing softballs at everybody, or this isn't going to teach us what we really need to know. Right. For example, the Waymakers certainly are in the room where the data is being interpreted. The Waymakers say, why are we always looking for the least common denominator? Some of these nuances and these differences are where we can really learn how to get better, right? Waymakers are challenging assumptions every step of the way. But then once you have that data and you're gleaning some insights, and that you've asked the good questions, right? That you're looking at the margins for signs of what might be broken, you're then trying to identify the pieces or the steps on the talent journey that provide what I like to call opportunities for impact. I look at it as, where can we drill for oil? So if you ask really good experience questions, you may learn, gosh, we have a lot of opportunity in our onboarding process. We're never really getting people plugged into our company in the first place. Something's not working there. That's an opportunity for impact. Or people are really unsure about how to get to the next level. They do not know what the clear criteria is. They do not know how to develop the kinds of connections or relationships that are going to help them get to that next level. We need to really do some digging around promotion, right? Or succession planning. So the insight should reveal to you, or suggest to you at the very least, what those steps are on the talent journey that give you an opportunity to make things better for everyone. At which point, the way I like to do it, I have an innovation mastery as well. So I love to, in a creative product development background, I love to kind of bring it all together in kind of a creative way to say, let's gather people from different levels of the company, people from different, identity backgrounds, people who have different tenure, people with different generations, right? Into a room for a half day and talk about these different steps on this talent journey, and ask people to consider and to discuss what's really working today. What do we think is broken? Again, what do we wish were true about this step in the talent journey? And where do we believe we really have significant risk? And have those robust discussions, right? From a 360-degree lens, to then look at all that data, those inputs, those ideas, and say, gosh, what bold choices can we make moving forward that are informed by some of these conversations? So I look at everything, honestly, as a creative problem to be solved.
Absolutely. I think it's a really interesting approach. It goes back to what you mentioned earlier. It's, by taking an approach like that, you're understanding those experiences deeper, right? And you're actually to the point that they're helping you solve
And you're
some of the
solving the
challenges.
real problem. You're solving the problem you actually have,
Right.
not the problem you think you have.
You just took my next question. So, it's like, I do think it's so powerful to have that data. But I think the hardest part's not gathering the data. It's figuring out, okay, what do I do with this? Like, what are the steps? And if you do this in a vacuum, don't you run the risk of actually just solving a perceived problem, but maybe not even the real problem. Am I right on that?
That's exactly right. Which is why, when I mentioned bring people together across dimensions of difference to talk about the opportunities and then to come up with ideas to solve them, that is a very, 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 very intentional, frame that I use. Because what you're doing is you are leveraging diversity in that moment to solve a business problem. One of the best things about diversity is it helps you see problems more broadly. and it helps you solve them more creatively. And so in that case, you're doing exactly that. You're leveraging that diversity to understand the problem and then to come up with ideas to solve it. What we do now often when we don't force diverse lenses on a problem, right? Both from a lived experience standpoint and the, preferences and delights and concerns and frustrations, you have, let's say I'm in control. I usually like to solve problems with people who think like me and approach the work like me because it's faster and it's less frustrating. And if I have a group that I always go to, my go-to crew who's going to solve these problems with me, well, guess what? If we're all optimists, we're all going to talk about what we already like about what we're doing, and then we're going to do more of that. If we're all problem solvers, we're all going to look for what's broken, and then we're going to try to fix that. If we're all innovators or creative people or pioneers, we're going to forget everything we already have going and come up with a completely new way to do it. And in any of those circumstances, we have missed really important lenses, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I'm a pioneer. If somebody asks me to think about how we can make a process better, if I leave myself to my own devices, I won't even pay a lot of attention to what's happening right now. I'll just get in a room and come up with a totally new way to do it. And then people will be like, but wait, Tara, some of this though isn't broken. Some of this is working really well as is, right? So you get where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I think I'm smirking over here because it's like, yep, that's me. Yep. Totally optimistic. Like, this will take what, 3 weeks, when in actuality, if we want to do it right, it's going to take 6 months and a lot of investment. And I just love new. I love change, so
Me
yes,
too.
I'm very much like, oh, we can do this better. Let's completely throw everything out and start
all
over.
the things. Yeah, which because I'm sure you've worked with so many different kinds of people, is like maddening for folks who think incrementally, but also who spend a lot of time building systems to, be sustainable. Like, you can't just throw everything away and start from scratch every single time you want to make a change.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is we're going to have a wonderful conversation, but maybe you and I should not work together on a project team where we have to do a deliverable in a realistic timeline.
Alone. We should not work alone on a project.
We need to have the diversity of thought on that team, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
I think one of the things, I loved how you said it. It's, and I think about this in the context of my team, I've got that go-to person. Mm-hmm. And I have go-to people for specific things just because I know it's fast.
That's right.
And I got a lot of emails coming in. I got a lot going on. I just want to, let's get this done now. This will be quick.
That's it.
And I'll, to share maybe a personal anecdote here, this is exactly what happened when we did our last employee opinion survey. and we heard that career development is something that we're not great at.
Yep.
Which what to me was not surprising. It's something that I would have said that without doing this, this massive global survey. And the way that I wanted to solve it was by the exact formula that I've seen it solved in the past at other companies that I've worked at, and through some of my peers who are a lot like me, who have done things in their companies. And so, it was a little bit of an aha moment where it's like, well, what we did instead, thankfully, was we took it to our women's employee resource group, because that was one of the groups that specifically was saying, hey, we need more career development here. Mm-hmm. And they came back with a totally different solution, something that we're looking to implement that I never would have thought of, and literally like helped me completely reshape how to think about this in the context of my organization. To go back to your other point of, hey, there's not really a right way to do it. You need to listen to your team and figure out how to do it.
I mean, you leveraged the power of diversity in real time. When we just do things the way, again, we've always done it, we make too many assumptions, especially when it comes to creating more equitable and inclusive cultures. Like, if everything we've already been doing could help us achieve that, we would have achieved it, but we have not. So we should know that means we need to approach these problems in a totally new way. And the thing you said too that I think is really important is we have our go-to crew because it's faster, but bias travels with speed. We know that theoretically, but we don't realize how often we allow it to drive us or to take root, right? Because we're thinking about being efficient, but efficiency is the enemy of equity in many cases. Because in order to do something fast, you have to rely on the formulas that you know. You have to rely on what's comfortable and natural for you. So it does take, a lot, I think. It takes very conscious action for us to disrupt some of those norms on purpose and be okay with the fact that it might take us a little bit longer to get to the right answer as a result. We have a hard time with that. And I know why. We're all being asked to do more with less. But I got to tell you, if we were to just slow down, right, slow down to go faster, we wouldn't still be having the same conversation 10 years from now.
Powerful statement. I had never really thought of it in that context, to be honest with you. Bias travels with speed. I think that's worth repeating, but it's so right. The systems that we operate in at work clearly have not helped equity, but we continue to operate in that paradigm because it's what we all know.
It's the way we do things.
Yes. Exactly.
And it's connected to, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, to our orthodoxies, right? Like we all have orthodoxies. This is just how we do this here. These are the rules we abide by. These are our norms. We don't even question them anymore because it's just the way it is. And if we can find the courage and just a little bit of patience to acknowledge to ourselves that the way things are is not the way they could be, then I think we would start to address some of these challenges very differently.
Absolutely. And in my pioneering mode, I'm also thinking and if we don't figure this out,
right,
the future is going to be scary. And my theory is you're going to lose because you're not going to be able to retain, engage, and win with a diverse team, which is what it's going to take to win.
Right. And the future, I mean, I don't have to tell you this. You swim in this data, I'm sure, all the time, but 87%, I think it is, of Gen Z says that diversity and equity and inclusion are very important to them in choosing a workplace. That is not, for the record, 87% of Black and brown people. That is not 87% of women. That's 87% of all Gen Z. So let's back up. If they say it's very important in selecting a company, and yet we can't find the time or money or patience to invest, that's going to be a pretty sad state of affairs here in a few years.
Absolutely. It's table stakes at this point,
It is.
right?
It is table stakes. Yes.
Pay, benefits, diversity, like that.
Yeah.
And the reality is, and they just won't tolerate it. I mean, those
no.
I mean,
they won't come in the first place. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you're lucky if they started. Yeah. Just the other day, I literally just talked to my recruiter, and she had a candidate who had probably 10 specifically pointed questions regarding our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
That's right. And that's becoming the norm.
Yeah. Yeah. Between that and work-life balance, we got to be willing to change. So, Tara, you're preaching to the choir there. That's a whole nother podcast. But it's coming. So, hang on. And you better get this figured out.
That's right.
With that being said, I wish we had more time. We're coming to the end of our time together, and it's just been a wonderful conversation. But I want to shift gears. I'm fascinated to hear your responses to the Rebel HR Flash Round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Question number 1. Where does HR need to rebel?
HR needs to rebel on the inside first. I know that's probably not what you meant by that question, but we need to rebel against our own antiquated ideas, if you ask me. And if we can do that, then I think we give ourselves the opportunity to look at every problem with fresh eyes.
I'm all in on that. I second that. I think that's where it starts, right? You got to be willing to rebel a little bit.
Yeah.
In an HR way, but
Yes.
you have to look inside before you can really impact your organization.
Right.
All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
Our people. We should be listening to, that's an obvious, but we should be listening to our employees. You should not be listening to all the articles and the think pieces and your competition. I mean, if they're a different company, they have different problems, and therefore they're going to have different solutions. So I believe that your people are your greatest source of insight.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And obviously I think we've hit this point quite a bit on this podcast, but I mean, I can't tell you how many HR professionals I've spoken to in this topic. And a lot of times they're really they're asking for what's the right answer.
The manual.
Yeah. Can you just give me, the answers to the test, or what should we do? Or can you help us do this? And, a lot of times the answer is no, not really. I can't tell you what you need. I can't tell you. You have to go discover that yourself with your organization.
And honestly, Kyle, I wrote the Waymakers for those people. Because it doesn't give you the answers, but it tells you how to get them.
Absolutely.
And I do think a lot of people need help doing that, right? We have so many fence sitters still, I believe not because people don't care or don't want to contribute to change, but because they don't know exactly what to do or they feel insecure about doing it. And I mean, that's why the subtitle is Clearing the Path to Workplace Equity with Competence and Confidence, because those are the two things that are missing right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll take that a step further. Once you get the answers, then you've got to be willing to do something about it, right?
That's it. That's
right. The Waymaker, right? Okay.
That's it.
Last question. How can our listeners connect with you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me under Tara Jaye Frank. And I'm also on Twitter, though less active there. My website is tarajayfrank.com. And that's where people go when they want to have me speak to their organization or do leadership, inclusive leadership capacity building, or any of those other fun things that I do.
Absolutely. And we'll have all those links in the show notes. So open up your podcast player, click in there. We'll also have a link to the book. Again, the book is The Waymakers, Clearing the Path to Workplace Equity with Competence and Confidence. Go grab a copy today. It's going to help you get better. So really appreciate the time today, Tara. It's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much.
Agreed. Thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.